watch, so we want to keep this down to a half-hour segments. It's what?
306.
3:06. So in 30 minutes, will somebody holler to me okay.
I can figure that out.
Are you all set, Henry?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm going by memory. I don't remember precisely, but it seems to me that at Lake Worth last August, we ended our clinic on the note that at the next meeting we would take up what to do to get our locomotive ready to run. And at that time I indicated to you that we would not bring up the fact of how to fire a steam locomotive, because at this time, if you remember right, when we fire a steam locomotive, we're going to have to go to the locomotive, and if your father or your family or your preference, you'll have to go to an oil burner and learn it. You'll have to go to a coal burner and learn it, and a propane burner to learn it. So we must learn all three types of firings. Even if it's a wood burner, we have to learn it in case you want to learn how to fire a wood burner. At this time, there is no use trying to describe to you of how to light the fire and how to fire any type of burner, because in order to do so, we must be in the cab to do it. And instead, we will start this segment by saying we're going to light the fire. Consider the fire is lit. How to light it you'll get later, but consider the fire as being lit, and what we're going to do between now and the time we take it out and run it. Okay, you have to wait, of course, until your steam pressure is up to working pressure. There are some cautions in here, and I'm going to try to take them in a chronological order. I think the most important job that you can do while your fire is going is to lubricate all the moving parts of your locomotive. Now this is so important, kids, that there's only one person who can lubricate my steam locomotive. I won't let anybody else. I won't even let Jim do it, and he's a good operator. That person is myself. I think it's so important because look at it in this light. Supposing Tommy and I are going to fire off our locomotive. We got the fire going. It's an oil burner, so we don't have to pay much attention to the fire. Just let the thing simmer there. And I say, Tommy, here, you oil all the bearings. Now, he doesn't know where all these bearings are that need attention. So he oils only the ones he can see, and all the other ones that he can't see doesn't get any oil. It's not his fault. He's never been trained for it. And he doesn't know where they are. So he oils just what he can see. So we take the engine out and we run for 2, 3, or 4 hours, and all of a sudden something starts squealing and rasping and the engine is pulling hard. And we say, oh, something's gone wrong. And we look, and sure enough, there's a bearing way up under the boiler there that we forgot to oil, and it's shot. Tommy gets to go home and go to bed that night. I have got to tear the locomotive down, and for 3 days, I'm digging into that locomotive to get to the bearing for replacement. And I say 3 days depending on where the bearing is. If it's an easy bearing to replace, it would have been oiled because Tommy would have seen it. I therefore tell you that the first thing you do is to learn where all of the bearings are and practice oiling them, memorize where they are so that you can get them oiled. You're given plenty of time to do this while the engine is under fire, while the boiler is under fire, excuse me, and while you're waiting for the steam pressure to come up. Now, while you're waiting for your steam pressure to come up, you also can do this. If your engine is equipped with sand drop, you fill your sand containers. You have to know which engine has sand and which doesn't. You have to know where your sand tanks are. Okay, that is quite easy. So you fill your sand drop containers. You can fill your tender with water after you've added your compounds. I think we covered that. So, didn't I promise I was going to bring you all a written... well, I'll get them to you. I've got them at home. I forgot to bring them. That's my fault. Anyway, put your compounds in for your water treatment and fill your water tender. I forgot to add a most important thing. The very first thing you do before you light your fire, kids, is to find out how much water is in your boiler. If you ran your locomotive yesterday, you may have left it completely full of water so that you can't even see it in your water column. You blow it out until it's down to operating level. If there isn't any water in the boiler, you fill it full of water before you light your fire. That is most important. I'm sorry I forgot to tell you that, because if you didn't fill your boiler with water, you've ruined it, especially if it's a copper boiler that's been silver soldered. Okay, if you are firing a coal fire, you will have to check every once in a while before your steam pressure comes up. Check it every once in a while to be sure you don't have any holes in your fire. You'll have to check it to be sure that you're getting good combustion. Check it to be sure that the ashes aren't forming hard in there and aren't clinkering. You shake it up with a poker, put more coal in it if necessary. If you're burning wood, of course, you got to give it real good attention and keep wood going to it, because wood will burn up fast. Propane and fuel oil, you don't have to pay too much attention to it. Okay. Another thing that as your pressure comes up in fuel, in fuel oil, is that your pressure needle, let's say, was around 40 to 45 pounds. You notice it's crept up to 50, which tells you that you're beginning to generate steam, but she's still running on air, which you'll learn about when you're ready to fire an oil burner. But as that pressure starts coming up, you have to back off your blower a little bit, because I'll explain that to you later. I don't want to get into that now. But as I pointed out, in coal or wood, you must pay attention to your fire. I made the statement that with propane or oil, you don't have to pay too much attention to it. You don't until she starts to generate steam. Then, as the oil is being consumed and you are getting steam generated, you have to back off on your blower and back off on your atomization, because your pressure is getting higher and is forcing more oil into your burner. That will come later. All right, let's assume now that your propane, your coal, your oil, or your wood has taken your pressure up to about 80 pounds, where you can disconnect all air lines leading to the boiler, that you can let the engine begin to percolate or steam on its own. At this time, you can start to drain your steam pumps. You're under steam pressure now, but you're only around 80 to 85, maybe 90 pounds. In the cab, open your valve and watch the water come out of your steam pump. You want to drain it. Open your cylinder cocks. Watch the water just pour out of your cylinders. It might be a good idea also to crack your throttle valve just a little bit and watch the water come out of your stack. And I think it's a good idea to cover a steam locomotive while you're doing this. because that water sometimes come out in such volume, and believe me, it's dirty, rusty oil, and it goes up and comes right down on top of your boiler and dries there. And after you've done this for about a month, the aesthetic views of your locomotive begin to look like it belongs in a garbage dump, and it's awfully hard to get off, believe me. So cover it with a rag, or a nice long rag, and this keeps your boiler clean and handsome looking. Now you're trying to get rid of all this excess water that's in your cylinders, that's been in your stack, and it's been in your pumps. Your pressure now is probably up to 100 to 110 pounds. You can try your injector. Okay, you try it. The first time you turn it on, that excess water that's up in your steam line part of your injector will prevent the injector from working properly, and it won't lift the water out of the tender into the boiler. She'll probably sit there and blow. Turn it off, turn it back on again, and she'll go right off, assuming that the inside of the injector is clean and that your filters are clean. You're up to a point now where your pop-off valve is beginning to go, and you are about ready to run, because you've taken care of all these things in sequence, and you're not going to have to waste time doing it. You're ready to go, except for one thing. You got to go back and you got to go get your cars. Most of the time we only have the locomotive and the tender, but we got to go back and get cars. So you pull your engine out onto the side, off the siding, and go to the place where the cars are. You couple up, and if they're in a car barn, like some of us have car barns, pull your cars out. Get off your engine, turn your fire back if you can, because you're going to let it sit there. See if you can get your steam pump going to be sure that it's pumping water. Good for you. Go back and check every car. You check it to be sure. You can do it really quickly. At first it's a little slow. You check the pin that's in the knuckle to be sure it's there. Sometimes pins have a chance of working out, especially if they're not fastened underneath. These little rascals will work out, and they'll get way up in here and then break. Check to be sure that the pin, the swivel pin, is all the way down. Now those you don't usually have too much problem with. And above all, check for chains. Be sure your chains are in place. This is important. Do this between every car, all the way back to the end of your consist. Now you're coupled up. We have all different kinds of brake systems. So the only thing I could tell you at this point is, with nobody in the train but yourself, you get your train going about 4 or 5 miles an hour and apply the brakes to be sure it stops. If it stops, good. If it stops pretty quick, good. If it doesn't stop, if you don't feel any halting of the consist, the whole thing, when you apply your brakes, there's something wrong. Most important that you have your brakes tied into your system. If your brakes aren't working, do something, look for it, find your trouble, and fix it. Don't run without it. You're asking for troubles. If you have a brake system that's pretty well mechanically brake-free, if you use an engine or trains a lot, if they're sitting a lot, they may have some problems with you, but if you run an engine a lot, you won't have any trouble with brakes, you won't have trouble with pumps. Your injectors will work readily, except when they dirtied up. If you keep your filters, every steam pump and injector should have a filter behind it. It should, or ahead of it, I should say, so that you catch all the corruption that comes out of the water that gets into our tenders. And then, assuming your brakes work, that all your consist is tied together well, assuming that your pumps are all working, that your water supply is right, and that you have taken care of adding fuel oil to your tank, coal to your bin, wood or that you have enough propane, you are ready to go. From my own experience, I would suggest that you don't run a locomotive, any kind, no matter what fuel you're burning, with just the engine and the tender. It's not fair to you, because very seldom will you ever run that light. In my own experience, I have found that the heavier consist you have behind, I'm only speaking of steam now, the heavier consist you have behind, the easier it is to fire a locomotive, because you can bring your fire up and leave it up. If it's propane, you bring that fire up until it's roaring. If you have a good long consist, if you have a short consist, you don't have to come up so far. This is something that you get used to. In oil, bring it up to its roaring. In coal, you get a good hot fire going there. Good hot coals, white hot. You see, if you learn to run a locomotive and a tender, and that is all, and then you have some friends come, and your dad says, let's get the engine out, and you put on 4 or 5 cars, and your friends all get in it, this changes the situation 100%. You've got to put more water into the boiler by speeding up your pumps. Your braking action is slowed down because of the additional weight behind you. Your fuel consumption changes terrifically. So I have found it a lot easier to run with heavy loads and then able to back off when I have the lighter loads. And believe it or not, I still have a problem. If I've been running and I have 11 or 12 cars on with a mess of people in them, and then all of a sudden I leave my cars someplace and I take the engine and say go after water, I'll blow my fire out just like that, because I haven't deregulated my fire to the point, and that I wasn't thinking. When you are running a steam locomotive, you will find that, and I know you've read this in Live Steam magazine, you will find that most of the time your eyes are in the cab. You're checking your pressure gauge to be sure that you're not backing off, especially if you have an oil burner. If you start backing off on oil, your blower begins to back off, your blower begins to back off, your atomizer begins to back off. When all these things begin to back off, then your pressure gauge starts to back off even more, and it keeps backing off more and more and more. So that, wait a minute, I gotta give Betty my keys here. Good girl. So that you run into trouble there. So you've got to watch your pressure gauge. If you have air brakes, you've got to watch to be sure that all the time your air pressure is up. If you have a sand drop and you've got a gauge for a bell ringer and a sand drop, you've got to keep that pressure up, because sometimes you're going to have to drop sand, especially on wet or dewy track. Your water column, of course, is most important. You've got to be sure that all the time you've got enough water into it. So all the time you've got to keep your eyes in your cab. The first time around, I'll admit, you've got to watch your track. Maybe the night before there have been dogs fighting on it, or a raccoon's been out there messing around and kicked stones up on the track. So the first time around, you got to be sure that your track is cleaned off. After that, you don't have to be too attentive to the track. You know where your switches are set. As a rule, 99% of our running is going to be when nobody else is on the track and we only got the one engine. So we know that our switches are set. We don't have to worry too much about the switches. So keep your eyes on your instruments. You'll always find yourself working the valves, trying to get a little bit more out of your engine, or trying to get less steam out of it because your pop valve is always popping off. Your water's coming up too full in your boiler, so you got to back off on your water. This can happen all the time. The man or person who is running a steam locomotive continuously. At a meet, it's different, because we run around the track, bring her up to a stop. We can sit there and fiddle with it and bring our water up or back it off or bring our steam pressure up. But if you start running, let's say Stephen and his dad are going to have a group of children over to their track, and they have a steam locomotive running. There's maybe 20 kids there, and you only got 3 or 4 cars, and you can only handle half the kids, and you got to have adults on board to watch them. So you're running 12 or 14 people, and if you've got a 1,500 feet of track, you're running around and you come back, those people get off, another group gets on, and in about 30 seconds you're going again. That's almost continuous running. So it's pretty tough, and you have to keep your pressures up and keep your eyes on your instruments in order to do this. And you've got to know when to bring your fire up, when to slack it off. And kids, there's only one way you can do that and get good at it, and that is practice. Like I say, if you're used to running an engine and tender and 2 or 3 cars, and you get used to running it, so many guys have come to my track, and they have 200 or 300 feet of track around their house, and they're from up north, and they come on down to my track, and they'll say, gee, I've really learned how to run this engine real good. And I say, fine, let's put her on the track, and they'll fire her up. Okay, John, have you got any cars? And we'll go back and get a consist of maybe 10 cars and put it behind his engine. And they'll go away, and they'll start going up the hill, and he'll stop. This always happens. I'll guarantee it to happen. He'll come to a stop, and I say, what's the matter? Oh, my steam pressure dropped. I can't understand why my steam pressure dropped. I don't have this trouble on my track. I say, how many cars you usually run? 1 or 2? Well, I say, you got 10, 11 cars on now. It's entirely different. You got to run a lot hotter fire. You've got to bring that fire up and really make your steam. Did you want a question, Tom?
Spider-Man shot. The Spider-Man shot.
Get away. Okay. So, it takes practice, kids. And it takes practice with 3 and 4 cars, and it takes practice with 10 or 12 cars, because it's an entirely different bag of bees with a heavy consist compared with light consist. And the only way you can get practice is get out there and do it. Now, I've told some of the adults this, but when I was a real freshman on this stuff 12, 13 years ago, and I completed my engine, and I had 1 car, I had trouble keeping my oil burner lit because I didn't know how to operate it. I finally learned how to operate the oil burner, and I had 1 car, and I thought that was great, and I made 3 more cars. I ran through 3 more, and then all my family and the grandchildren used to get in it, and I couldn't fire that thing worth a hoot, and I had to learn all over again, because I didn't know how to bring my fire up. I'd try to bring it up, and I'd lose my fire, and you can lose a fire, whether it's oil, propane, or coal, you can lose it. Coal, you can burn a big hole right in the center where there's nothing but grates there, and around the donut, the meaty part where you thought you had a lot of good hot coals, there's nothing but dead coals, maybe with a flicker of red in them, but nothing that you can make steam with. So you build your fire all over again, and it can happen. Propane, you can suck it off the burner, and oil, you can suck it off the burner. Coal, you can blow it out, wood, you can blow it out the stack in big chunks. Like big hunks of wood will just come right out of the stack, and they'll still be on fire, and they'll set your grass afire if you don't watch out. Now, I think the time is about up, and I think we should make a decision here while we have some of the adults here as to when we can start to learn how to fire locomotives. We want to, I really would prefer, and I throw this out to the fathers here, a one-on-one, because I think you can get closer on it. And you all be at the steam meet in February, and that's going to be really a tough time. If you could, maybe on Sunday afternoon, we could get Steve. Sunday afternoon of the meet. Will you still be there? See, we can get
We can arrange it, yes.
we can get the Hill family anytime because of their closeness. Now, how about Richard?
Well, I think he's a little young for this, but
Yeah, how old are you, Richard?
7.
7.
maybe if you could sit in and just watch.
Yeah, he could watch and learn. You haven't been at all these clinics, have you? How about you now? Are you? How old are you? How much? 14. Well, you're in good shape for it. But at a meet, at a steam meet, it's pretty tough. But we could handle one or two on a Sunday afternoon. You know, things are beginning to go downhill.
Early part of the afternoon.
Yeah, in the early part of the afternoon, and the Hill, Susie and Tommy, we can get almost any time on oil. Now I'm only talking on oil. I can't. We'll have to line somebody up for the propane, who's got a good propane that they'd be willing to teach about, and on the coal. Now I think Ralph Richards I could think of, and I could think of propane is relatively easy. It really is. It's dangerous to handle. It's extremely dangerous to handle. But if handled carefully and you know what you're doing, you can knock the danger element right out of it. But we should talk to somebody who has propane and somebody who has coal and make arrangements with them. The arrangements we'll make with Stephen and the Hill family. Let's see, where do you live?
Old Ardell.
Oh, Lordy. Will you be up to meet in February?
Probably. Pretty sure.
Because I'd like to have at least an hour with each youngster, at least an hour. Because we got to start right from scratch. You know, cold water, bring it right on up.
Right.
Okay, if you're up there at the steam meet, if you're there Sunday afternoon, that's the only time we could get you. That's the last day of the meet. We'll get you Sunday, and we'll get you Sunday. You, Susie, and we can get you some warm Saturday or Sunday afternoon, anytime. As long as I don't have a group there, and I don't have very many groups during the winter, on the Sunday afternoon. Okay? And we'll just start from what I did. What I said today, we'll do. We'll just do it. Okay? Fine. Thank you.